Welcome to Module 4. In this module, we're going to look at First Nations and Aboriginal gangs. When we look at First Nations gangs, it becomes very clear to us that while in the last module, our general gang population is different than the United States, the First Nations gangs that we see do have some similarities. Where we lack the same deadly areas found in many large US cities, East Los Angeles, south side of Chicago, west side of Boston. While we lack those areas, we do have the same issues on some of our First Nations reserves. That's clear when we watch the video from Hobbema that is part of our required viewing for this chapter. We also look in this module at the study that was prepared by the Solicitor General of Canada. This is a Word document that is attached. It's not in your course pack, but it talks about the fact that the lack of research in of itself into this issue speaks to the marginalization of Aboriginal youth in our country. Our Aboriginal youth are marred with disrupted lives because of dysfunctional families, lack of education, lack of work, negative peer associations, and systemic discrimination and labeling. Like the United States, our First Nations gangs have strong influences from our correctional facilities. Just like it is in the United States, some of our gangs are street gangs associated to First Nations, were started in prisons and continue to thrive and be ran out of correctional facilities. They're more like US-based gangs in the use of hand signals, tattoos, and strict chains of command. For these youth, when they're making choices, they learn very quickly that they can make considerably more income from doing one drug deal, one package delivery, one hand-to-hand, than they ever can if they can find legitimate work. Material gain is the main benefit. It's not the only benefit. With Aboriginal gangs, other real considerations is a lack of benefits to that group that should be filled by other legitimate social institutions in our country. Interviews with Aboriginal gang members and prison staff found that Aboriginal youth were involved in street crimes such as trafficking, prostitution, and break-and-enters. Generally, not well organized, but very violent. There are three major groups in Canada: the Indian Posse, the Native Syndicate, and the Warriors. They're involved in drug trafficking, violence associated with control lines, and prostitution. The Hobbema Reserve is a video that you are required to view for this module. The Hobbema Reserve is very rich because of oil, but they have an unbelievable crime problem. The researchers tell us that our Canadian prisons are breeding grounds for Native gangs. Further, the spread of gangs. The moving of Native gang leaders across the country simply spreads the gang problem and the violent confrontations that occur in our prisons. Edmonton Police Service believes, their gang unit believes that they have 19 street gangs in Edmonton. They're clear. No two gangs are alike. A lot of the gangs started simply as groups, friends, ethnically homogenous groups of friends, family, or acquaintances. Similar to the work that we looked at in the first module from Frederick Thrasher. Alliances are made on rational basis, generally financial gain. Majority of gangs are now mixed race, and they come from the lower to middle class. When we look at the Edmonton gang situation, most of these gangs are ethnically homogenous. Their violence is intraracial, meaning from Aboriginal to Aboriginal. Very rarely is this violence outside of their own race. They're clearly more violent in their gang culture. Jumping in and jumping out, similar to the United States, is commonplace. They also use tattoos, areas of responsibility and territory, hand signals, and major influence in and out of our prisons. As we turn to some of our criminologists for explanations, Hershey and his bond theory is very applicable as we look at this group. Hershey believed that rather than look at why people commit crime, why not look for an answer in why people do not commit crime? He looked at why does this group of people not commit crime and this group of people do? He found that people are generally hedonistic. They maximize pleasure versus pain. Crime is easier than work. So why do not more people do it? To cheat on an exam is easier than to study. Stealing is less work than a job. He found that we do not commit crime generally as a society, in conventional society, because we don't want to face humiliation. We don't want those who support us to have to go through court. We don't want people who love us to visit us in prison. We're committed to society. We have conventional jobs. We have healthy work connections with our peers. We don't want to let people down. And finally, generally, we believe in the system. We believe if you work hard, you'll be rewarded. For Aboriginal youth and family and bond theory, socialization, the Aboriginal culture is rich with tradition, respect for elders, and other cultural things that are not consistent with gang activity. So why is it so many Aboriginal youth have turned to gangs? Aboriginal culture has suffered, and family traditions have suffered as a result of colonization and resultant residential schools. Structure, cultures, families, elders have all suffered from this. Trevathan and et al. Found that Aboriginal offenders were involved far greater in child welfare systems than non-Aboriginals in their study. 50% of Aboriginal offenders described unstable family life in teenage years compared to 32% of non-Aboriginal offenders. This is critical for our study. This is critical for policymakers. If we want to end gang violence, we want to end gangs, we must look at solutions, long-term sustainable community solutions for this group of people. Finally, bond theory talks about education. Aboriginal youth on some of these reserves have a much higher dropout level. They're certainly absent from school more, and they have great difficulty identifying with teachers and peers. When we continue to look at bond theory and we look at Aboriginals, some of these youth on these reserves that join gangs, well, they faced 2 to 3 times higher rate of unemployment. The average for the Aboriginal employed person was $21,485, whereas for the average non-Aboriginal working Canadian, it was $32,183. There's clearly disparity in living existence for these people. We turn from bond theory to Sutherland's differential association theory. Sutherland's differential association theory clearly says a person becomes a criminal when they perceive more benefit than unfavorable consequence with respect to violating the law. It's a pros and cons. If I continue to do this, this is where I'll end up. However, if I do this, this is where I'll end up. Simply put, more pros and cons. Differential association theorists would believe that those youth that join gangs do so because they have a criminal family member or delinquent peer that's very influential in their life. Media and movies that glorify the gangster life is very influential on this youth group. Disenfranchised youth living in an area wrapped with poverty and gangs will see a legitimate role model from other gang members. Social disorganization theory says in a community lacking social order, one will find greater gang involvement. Social disorder includes poverty, class conflict, guns and drugs, limited social and economic opportunities, discrimination, and distrust of the police. Let's look to conflict theory and labeling theory. Young people join gangs as a result of their feelings of marginalization. They band together for support, camaraderie, and protection. Stigmatization by authorities such as police, parents, teachers, social workers will clearly force these youth from what may be a troubled experience, labeled as a bad person, labeled as a criminal, will make them look to other criminals to fit in. Negative labels propel the students into the arms of similarly labeled. As we consider the Aboriginal gang crime issue, we have to look at why are the specific similarities between this gang crime group and the experiences that U.S. police, U.S. cities are experiencing. There's poverty. There's lack of social structure. There's a common enemy, the police. We must consider this as we move forward. Thank you very much.